All right, well, good morning to folks who are just jumping on. We're going to give this a few seconds to let everyone kind of come into the room, so bear with us while we let Zoom do its thing and get signed up and viewing the screen. As folks are signing on, I'll just go through a little bit of logistics. If you're having any trouble signing on or hearing us right now, please be sure to go into the chat box and put a little note there, and Alex from our team will write back to you and help you kind of navigate any of those issues or problems that you might be having. We'll wait just another few seconds and then get going. Okay. All right, well, I'll go ahead and start with our introduction, and I'm sure we'll have more folks come in as minutes tick by. I'm Danielle Varda. I am the CEO of Visible Network Labs and the co-director of the Center on Network Science at the University of Colorado, Denver. Welcome everyone today to our monthly webinar, Network Leadership Lessons from the Field. It is my pleasure today to have Peter Eckhart on the phone with us, on the webinar with us. Peter's someone that I admire in so many ways, and to get an hour of his time to tell us about how his methods have led themselves to the building of quite an impressive network of people cross-sector around the country is just something everyone's going to be excited to hear more about. I'm going to pass it off to Peter in a moment here, but first, as usual, I'm going to go through a little bit about us and why we do this work. So just to get everyone started, I'd like to talk about our team a little bit. This is our Visible Network Labs team and the Center on Network Science. Robin Mobbs and I co-direct the Center on Network Science, which co-hosts these webinar series. And Paige, Sarah, Mike, and Alex right now are our team. We're hiring, which I'll mention in a minute, but these are the folks behind the scenes that make things happen. And we have a whole ton of partners all over the country that work with us on leadership training, evaluation, and research. So this is really just a small piece of that. At Visible Network Labs, we do a couple of things. We do data analysis and visualization. We help people collect data on networks, and we try to make that as easy as possible. And then we provide the support to make sense of it all. At the Center on Network Science, we focus some of our real focused evaluation and research projects. So we're a team that works together across all of these different efforts and producing things like these webinars as a way to support people. So just a fun few things that we have at Visible Network Labs are infographics and resources. We just want you to be able to find things that you might hear about in our webinars and ways of getting access to more learning on those things. So we have a bunch of things like this. We have a blog. We have a Network Science 101 toolkit that you can find under our About section and our Learning section. And then we, do all of this work with data and visualizing networks. So it's our goal to bring tools to communities to build capacity for doing this kind of work. And so that's why we present things like this and also all of these kinds of resources. One of the great things about today's webinar is we're talking to people who provide awesome resources also. So you're probably going to be overloaded today with all of the possibilities of where to look next, but also probably feel really equipped. A few things, we do have things coming up like next year, our Network Leadership Training Academy. We have a demo on our partner tool on the 25th. We actually do have our next webinar scheduled for August 14th at 10 a.m. And we'll put some information out on that. It's Leah Perkinson, who has done some pretty amazing work, especially around domestic violence and advocacy for women and families. And I think you'll be really excited to see what she has and is offering next in August. Last thing, we did want to make sure everyone had access and knew where to find the toolkit, but we have a big announcement that we are hiring, and so we are looking for someone to join our research and evaluation team. So if you're really into networks, you're super geeky about that, and you're mission driven, and you like to do this kind of work, please be sure to sign up and, log on to our job board and check that out and spread the word. You can find more about us at these different links, pretty much anything that's related to Visible Network Labs. And then I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes here on what we mean by network leadership and the network way of working. So we know that there is kind of this new norm called the network way of working, and really what it means is that people out in the world today are really working hard to figure out how to work across boundaries. In the case of what Peter will talk about today is information and work on sharing data, which is almost another level of working across boundaries. But we know that people are looking for skills and resources to do that work. And most people are on the same page right now that this is a way to solve big problems. So what we're really working on doing is figuring out ways through this thing we call network leadership that allows us to help people build, manage, and evaluate effective networks. So we do webinars and trainings for that purpose. And that's a big focus actually of today's webinar, is to really learn from people who are on the ground doing that work and some kind of peer-to-peer learning about doing it. Network leadership for us is driven by 7 core values. One is that it is inclusive, meaning that it's not just for that person who runs the network, but we believe network leadership are skills that people need even when they're community members participating or even just interested stakeholders, but that if together we all build those skills, we'll all in turn be better network leaders, which will drive a network forward. So some people might call this collaborative leadership. We don't get too hung up on the words. What we're trying to do is focus on the skills that we think people need in order to work better together. It's adaptive, meaning, actually I'll go to, it's community and culturally sensitive, meaning that we know that every community is really different. And so we can't really create the 5 core value or the 5 core, things of network leadership that everyone should do. Rather, we believe that we can focus on relationships, build skills, provide data, be reflective, and then adapt all of that learning to really wrap around communities and their differences. So we love to really make sure that we pause and acknowledge that this is not a toolkit for how to do network leadership. It's rather a way of thinking and a way of learning together so that we can build our adaptive network leadership skills. So that's our start on what we are and why we do this work, but let's get to the good stuff now. So some of you on the phone may know Peter Eckhart. He may be new to others, so I will go ahead and read his bio. His contact is here, such a actually personable person you'll hear in a second. He is the director of the Center for Health and Information Technology at the Illinois Public Health Institute, and currently leads the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded National Program Office of Data Across Sectors for Health, which we call DASH. DASH identifies barriers, opportunities, promising practices, and indicators of progress for multi-sector collaboration to connect information systems and share data for community health improvement. And on top of that, Peter also has co-founded All In, which All In Data for Community Health, which is a national network of projects with a common goal of improving multi-sector data sharing and collaboration. He's also leading a health and housing data planning effort in Metro Chicago and an IT learning collaboration for the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging. So as you can tell, Peter is a guy who does a lot of things with a common theme between them, which is to really build bridges in communities to leverage resources and leverage knowledge in order to reach health and wellness outcomes. And that's why he's just such a perfect fit for our webinar today. So right now, it might be a surprise, but Peter is on the phone. It's not just me talking. So Peter, what I like to do is start out the webinar before you share your slides and before you tell us about the work you do. Here at Visible Network Labs, we find that in the work that we do every day, we get to meet really neat people. And we asked ourselves at one point, who are we to keep all of these relationships to ourselves? And so we like to make sure that people who are presenting also get a moment to just share who they are and kind of how they came to some of this work. So I'm going to do a couple of questions before I actually ask you to take it over and share your slides. So good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Danielle. Good morning, listeners.
Awesome. And one thing I didn't mention is Peter also has a podcast. So actually, if you like these things, make sure that you look him up. I'm sure he'll mention that a little bit in a moment. So just to kind of break the ice and get us, chatting a little bit, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the journey that landed you in this place where you find yourself leading these big complex networks, and how does that journey help other people know how they can be on a similar path?
Well, that's a super big question, and one that I spend a lot of time thinking about. So honestly, you're probably at some point just going to have to cut me off. I'm not a linear thinker at all. So feel free to say, okay, next slide, please. Whether
okay, that's my job.
Or not.
Okay.
I've been doing work in the social services space for my entire life. I have an undergraduate degree in business, and I spent some time doing volunteer work with the Lutheran Church in New York City and overseas for a couple of years. And so I found myself, though, always drawn to kind of understanding the conditions under which people live, what helps people to thrive, and what deters that from happening. And when it came time for me to really seriously think about what I wanted to do, I was applying for grad school from Kenya, and I thought I was applying for like a social justice curriculum. So I was pretty surprised when I got back to the States and discovered that I had actually been accepted into social work school. But that was cool, and I loved the 2 years that I spent studying social work, and that kind of propelled me from there into work, sitting inside communities, mostly on the north side of Chicago, working for a big social service organization. And so I started off doing community economic development, real estate development, small business. Pretty quickly moved into the technology space because there may be a few of you on the call that can remember a world where the internet didn't exist. And so that's when I was coming of age, and and I saw the power of what would become the internet as a force for connecting people to each other. And because of that, I really sort of became more and more interested in the application of tech to community development. I never was trained in it, but I was always the guy who wanted to ask questions and try to figure stuff out. And in the social service space, there just wasn't, that many resources. So somebody like me who was interested, okay, yeah, all right, we'll get you a computer at some point. So anyway, I ended up building the IT infrastructure for this human services agency, and ran that for 11 years before moving into the public health space. And that's where I've been for about the last 11 years. First working in health IT, health information transformation from a state perspective, and then for the last 5-ish years working on Dash. So in some way, all of that stuff is, kind of a boring way of understanding my resume. When I think about the work that I'm doing now, which I'll describe when I get to the slides, as building community capacity to do some kind of action around health. And so I can look back at my whole career and see that working in community organizing really framed my understanding of how to talk about what's in it for me, and how to have that conversation across the table with people that I'm not familiar with. And I understood from my time in community economic development about how important kind of the wealth and income underpinning is of people's ability to have agency over their own lives. And social work school taught me to really understand the complex systems that under which we all operate, and especially when we start to recognize the power of racism, sexism, and class distinctions that that elevate some of us, like me, and keep a lot of other people down. So I think my work now is the most exciting, most fun, hardest thing I've ever done, and I'm so glad to be doing it at this point in my career when I can appreciate that.
Well, and I actually love your story there that you added social work, community organizing, and technology all together in that. I mean, that's a pretty unique path. I can relate to it in some ways. I think I became a technologist along the way just because I could start to see it as ways to solve problems. But, it's definitely a good skill to have because we're just in an age, and you are running an online network, which means there's something about a tech space that's really important to that. So I have another question just about this. So, so Peter recently came to our Network Leadership Training Academy, and that was amazing to have him and his team participating there. But I wondered if you refer to yourself as a network leader either before or now, and whatever you call yourself, when did you realize that you were a network leader?
That Network Leadership Training Academy that I attended with you this year was instrumental in sort of me naming that for myself. I think other people might have said that about me. Certainly, All In Data for Community Health, that I'll describe in a second, is a network. We refer to the stuff in our world as collaborations, whether it's a local collaboration or a national one. But I mean, there's no distinction between that and a network. The piece that I found interesting and that I was, surprised to have the opportunity to reflect upon is thinking about networks as being led, because I like to live under the fiction that networks grow organically, and that really it's something where, ownership is distributed, and, and we find our paths forward together. But honestly, like all other enterprises of any importance, there are ways in which leadership happens, and I've been really thinking a lot about my own leadership ever since then.
Oh, awesome. Well, and I love that you just said we call it collaboration, but it's the same. I find a lot of the time people asking me to distinguish, are you doing collective impact or coalitions or collaboratives or networks? And for me, I think we get sometimes distracted by trying to label it what this thing is, because when you really just take the cover of the label off, we're all kind of trying to do the same thing underneath. So I actually appreciate that you said that. And I also, one thing that I think about network leaders is that, someone needs to be leading it, but that leading can come from many, and I think it can come from a lot of participatory and approaches and people. But if we all had the opportunity to think of ourselves as network leaders, like the whole world could be led, right, through these network leadership approaches with people who feel they're leading it. So I love that you said all of those things. I'm going to ask you one quick question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. And one thing I wanted to mention to everyone is you'll see in the chat box that Peter has put a poll in there. So if you go to the chat box and click on menti.com, you can start to answer the question. It's his provocative question that's going to link to his work. So go ahead and do that as well. But last quick question, just for fun. So if there was one thing that what could we know about you that we could not Google and find out?
So the thing that you can Google this, but you wouldn't really know it's me, is that I have, since the start of the Trump administration, been posting a song every day online, on Twitter, and on Facebook of hope and encouragement towards resistance. So I will take this moment to say it's a small p political act for people who need to be buoyed up. I don't really play an instrument, but I am constantly surrounding myself with music, and I found that the stresses that we're under as a country and as people in this work can use a little bit of musical support. So every day I try to come up with a song and post it. And so if you just Google Hope in Exile or go to hopeinexile.org, you'll see today's song, and you're welcome to follow.
I am so glad you shared that because I did not know that about you, and I can't wait to check it out. Is it you playing the music?
Oh God, no. Oh,
Okay.
oh, nobody wants that. No one would find hope in that. No, it's just music that I find from all over the place. I try
Awesome.
pretty hard to represent kind of gender and racial diversity. And I mean, there's so much great music. I mean, there are people who follow along. I mean, today is day 882. I just think that the biggest recipient of the benefits of this has been me and all the music I've discovered along the way.
Nice.
So it's just something that I want to share.
Wow, awesome. Okay, thank you. I couldn't have planted a better answer. That's so fun to hear about and know something about you that we couldn't find if we Googled you. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you. And what I'm hoping everyone will do is if you have questions for Peter, you can put them in the Q&A box and they'll get queued up as he goes through some of his presentation here. So Peter, you can go ahead and take over. Perfect. I see you doing that.
All right.
Awesome. Cool.
So I'm a little bit embarrassed to be the subject of a conversation like this because my work is absolutely sits where I sit with and around a bunch of other people who are in this work together. But I'm also grateful for the opportunity to reflect on some of this. One of the things that I was drawn to for the Network Leadership Training Academy, I want to make sure I got those letters in the right order, is the fact that the Visible Network Labs and all of you are not necessarily in the health space. And so because of that, and you're a little bit different, collectively from my normal audience, our normal audience, I wanted to quickly run through a couple of, not a couple, there's 8, but we'll go through them real quickly. I would like to get your quick response to the poll questions that are on the screen. 9 of you have discovered it. I don't know how many people are on the webinar. It's probably more than 9.
Yeah.
I'm always interested in both understanding the audience so that I can be relevant, but also these kind of opportunities where I sit outside the health space are really important for me because, as I'll talk about in a minute, what we all thought we understood about health is wrong. And part of what we're trying to do at Data Cross Sectors for Health and with All In is to present some new ideas. And so I'm actually going to jump off of the screen that has the link. But for those of you who are able to, if you go to menti.com and enter that code there, 903046, you can go through the series of 8 questions, and we'll kind of circle around to them a little bit later on, because I do want to set a little bit of the context, because not all of you know about what we're doing. So I'm going to show the slides. Danielle, am I successfully showing them?
You are. You're showing it with the kind of presenter view. So I think if you go up to display settings, yeah, perfect. I see you there. Yep.
How about that?
Yep,
that
I
cool?
think so.
All right.
I think, is there a delay? Did you click it? I'm still seeing both of them, but I also see that it looks like your mouse is still on that. So here we go. Let's see. Let's try again. I think that it actually stopped sharing for a second. And I do have them on my end if for any reason you're getting blocked. Here we go. There it is. Perfect.
All right. I'll never make another change. Okay. So, all right. I'm just going to get rid of that screen. So I'm going to talk about the social determinants of health. And so if you've taken the poll, you've told me whether these make any sense to you at all. So I'm going to assume some level of knowledge, but not necessarily a huge level of knowledge. And so one of the things that there's a lot of evidence around, and it also kind of makes sense if you just think about it, is that health is not primarily determined inside the doctor's office or at the hospital. A lot of you may have been exposed to the idea of when you think about kind of lifespan or quality of life, that your zip code is a better determinant of that than your genetic code. And that's just because we understand that the social forces, the nature of how we encounter the world across all of our different associations is a lot more important than the small amount of time that we actually spent with the doctor in hospitals. And so when we talk about the social determinants of health, we say that health is social and that these are active policy decisions that somebody made. Some of you might have been celebrating Juneteenth yesterday, and and sort of ruminating on the way that history of racism in our country persists today, and the way that has changed the fortunes of an entire race of people and our country as a whole. So that's policy decisions, that's social. We also say that health is determinant in that we know that these policies can be measured. We know that they have a direct impact on people. For instance, if you have access to a good mass transit that stops near you, your health outcomes will be better, because it turns out that whether or not you can get to the doctor, or whether you can get easily to work or to your kid's school or to a place to exercise, those things all matter, and they're all determined by your transportation options. Also, health, which used to be just, how are you feeling? Do you have asthma? Are you overweight? Do you have heart problems? Health now is understood to be broader than that. When we talk about health now, we're more and more frequently talking about health, well-being, and equity. And so taken together, when we're talking about health, we're really talking about new ways of thinking, and the fact that it's generated, those through us individually, but also in the context of our community. So a lot of you might remember that we lived through healthcare reform, and the way that investments, big federal money investments, made a big change in sort of how healthcare was delivered. I mean, the obvious way is that your health record became electronic. We are talking about all of the data that is not electronic, and it's really hard to share. If you just think about the data that you use in your day-to-day world, you probably have trouble trying to understand and manage all of your data, certainly in your ability to share it beyond your own walls. And so if data is tough to manage and tough to share, why would we bother doing it? Well, there's some pretty basic idea, and it pretty much centers around the idea that in our world, where we know that people need to connect, we socially have a need to connect, we have a need for community. We also recognize that the more diverse voices, the more diverse information that we have around our interactions, it turns out that that's a way to understand who we are and how we relate to each other. And so if you have more and more different kinds of data, well, then you can have a better understanding of how people are doing. You have a better understanding of how community is doing. And then once you really start to become facile with a lot of this multi-sector data, it turns out that you can start to address some pretty complicated problems. So when we think about this work, we really think about it rooted in community. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in community, a lot of forces. For us, when we talk about a multi-sector approach, we're typically talking about these sectors, but people in public health say everything is public health. Well, I'm not sure I would say that for sure, but certainly it's well understood, and there's a lot of evidence that what happens around your housing, around your education, the community safety that you enjoy or don't, actual health care, behavioral and mental health, access to social services, the economic nature of your world, public health itself, and the presence of community residents. All of these things we think of as different sectors that are all very relevant to our work. And because of that, there's lots of different kind of data that we're interested in. Now, the typical kind of what you might think of as health data is that service data that you have in your own online health portal. I was looking at mine this morning, and so I know it's there. It's a lot of super medical stuff. But there's all kinds of other really interesting data. Some of it geographical, some of it personally defined. If you've got a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, or you use the health app on your phone, you're generating all kinds of data. There's also kind of typical surveillance data: who got the flu, who has HIV, where is Ebola. That's all surveillance data. And then if any of you are connected to programs where you're trying to develop community outcomes, that's available too, as well as community data, and of course, everything in the census. When we talk about our work, we talk about two basic kinds of ways of using this multi-sector data. One, the one on the left, whole person systems of care. That's kind of new language. The old language is care coordination, but that just means that the people who you are working with, whether it's medical professionals or behavioral health professionals or people in social services, that everybody has access to the same information about one person. And so that when you talk about trying to understand somebody, you're talking about the whole person. On the other side, there's place-based system policy and environmental change. And that really means, how do you understand a community as a whole, usually a geographic community, but it can also be a population of a specific type. So that's more aggregate data. So it's two different ways of using multi-sector data. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about my own program, which is called Data Cross Sectors for Health. We were started about 5 years ago by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we're concerned with the stuff that you see on the screen now. We're concerned about community collaborations that are multi-sector in nature, that are actively trying to share data. And our thinking is, you put all that stuff together and you're building the capacity of community organizations and the people with them to improve the health in their community. I know I'm going through this really quickly and you'll have the slides. I don't want to spend too much time on my slides, but some of this I think is relevant even if you're not in health, because like for this, this is a capacity maturity model. And so I think it might be relevant for your work in the same way it's relevant for ours, but we think about collaborations being formed when people sit around in a community and figure out, what could we be working on together? What do we care about together? And that's the shared value. And then once you've established a shared value, then you start to say, oh, well, how can we work together? And that's the systems piece of it, recognizing that you can say we should work together, but you've actually got to do something. And so that's when you start to talk about shared data. If any of you are involved in a collective impact model, that's exactly what they're about. And then you move from shared data to the interventions. So, that's the programs or the actions if you're involved in community organizing. And then finally, and I'm gonna end my remarks at the top of the hour around talking about alignment. But that's the place that not very many of us are at, where we're saying, if we really are going to work together, then we need to tie our fates together. We have to give up turf for any of us individually to go for something greater. So Danielle, get ready to transition to some questions. Right here, I'm just talking about the fact that when we got our work started, and Danielle might ask about this, we looked around when Robert Johnson funded us, and they said, we want you to work in this area of expertise. So typically when the foundation or any foundation, supports a piece of work, they say, look around and see what else is happening. So when we did that, they found there were lots of other people who were trying to wrestle with some of these same things related to multi-sector data sharing. And so we started a new organization called All In, because we said, this is new to us. We certainly are not going to figure this out in a way that's completely different from other people. So rather than create another silo, ironically, around collaboration, why don't we try to do the collaboration at the same time? And so we found willing partners like the ones that are listed on this screen. The Community Health Peer Learning Program that's listed under the past partners, that was at Academy Health, and it was Dash and the Academy Health folks, especially my friend Allison Ryan there, was really where All In started. But there were a bunch of other folks who saw the value, and and there's 6 big national and state partners working together today, and these are very actively working together. Build Health Challenge, just they're currently choosing their 3rd cohort of communities they're supporting. We've got, at DASH, we have a call for applications in the field right now. The Public Health National Center for Innovations, they're going to be releasing a call for proposals this fall. So there's a lot of really active work happening. And in total, we've got about 150 collaborations that we sort of claim under All In. I just want to be super clear. That doesn't mean there are 150 active communities in All In. There are plenty that were active before and are no longer active. On the other hand, there's also communities that have never been funded by anybody, and they're still active. So it's a hodgepodge. I think that's fairly normal for network leadership. I think I'm going to stop there, Danielle, because I'm sick of talking.
Well, I actually want you to keep, we'll stop right now. Let's do that. And I almost wish you would keep going, because I think what you are doing and the work that you do is so interesting. And I think it is relevant, whether, like you said, if you're in health or not. A lot of the things that you're talking about matter. I just pulled up to share for everyone. I'm gonna go into some questions with Peter about how this actually works and how he actually runs all of these different activities that are going on that he just shared. But really quick, Peter, you had sent this, and we'll send this out to everyone who signed up for the webinar after. Kind of, I don't want to miss this. I don't want to miss the time for people on the call to really understand the extent to which you all provide resources and a big fall event. And things like that. So I wanted to just go right to this first and say, can you tell us a little bit about the resources that you all provide that help support this work?
Yeah. What is everybody seeing right now?
Are you seeing that? It's what I shared was your list of resources.
Oh, okay.
It's a Word
great.
document.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I do want to say, probably for most of you, perusing our list of potential resources is more valuable than probably anything I'm going to say in terms of our story. I mean, I think it's interesting, but I really want to make sure that that we communicate that the purpose of All In is really to make connections between people who are working in the same space. We really believe that the wisdom for multi-sector data sharing is in the room. And so if the room is bigger, then there's more wisdom there. And one of the things that we've been doing is collecting resources along the way. So there's some things that are resources that we've created. For example, a brand new resource that we just released in April is something called the Legal Bibliography. So if you are interested in doing any kind of data sharing that involved any kind of personal information, there's a whole lot of federal and state laws that regulate that. So we've got this tool called the Legal Bibliography, where you can look at over 100 different resources that we've curated so that you can get some help so that you don't have to start from ground zero. And that's so much of what we do is about trying to help accelerate what you're interested in doing. Obviously, if you need to be interested in something to do with health, because that's our niche. But if you're interested in multi-sector, community-based, collaborative approaches to health, we're your folks, we're your people. You are our people, and we want to help connect you with a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, and I should add, as someone who, Peter and I, you've talked about this once, where I was like, I don't know if I'm part of All In or not, and realized quickly that I was, because it's a broad community, there's an all-in discussion network that you can be on, and we get a digest, and it's where I get your newsletter every week, and I find it so valuable because it has funding opportunities, and then it has other webinars and events and things like that. And just while we're on this, before we go into any questions, and I'm going to start with a question from someone on the webinar, so if anyone else has questions, go ahead and queue those up. But can you talk about your in-person gathering in the fall, just so people know it's an opportunity to meet with a bunch of other people who are interested in this?
That is such a softball. I hope somebody actually asked about it, but yeah, we have, but I don't mind talking about it because the All-In National Meeting is really amazing. And we're going to have our third iteration of it this fall. It's going to be in Baltimore on October 15th through 17th, 300-ish people. I haven't been to any meeting that has been close to it in terms of engagement and quality, although I think the Network Leadership Training Institute was the closest I've ever experienced. And in fact,
awesome.
all the favorite things that we like from the NTLA we're going to have at the All-In meeting. But anyway, it's a really interactive, very, very high quality. We've got a lot of presentations, but every breakout session has got half of the time reserved for Q&A. Really, I mean, most of you probably don't know Dr. Rhea Boyd. She's a pediatrician who's going to be our keynote speaker on fighting racism in the safety net. I mean, it's an amazing meeting. It's pretty cheap as registration, so I would just highly recommend it if you've got any interest in collaborative approaches to community health.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I wanted to make sure people got the chance to know about that. So let's start with some questions. So the first one, in terms of the capacity maturity model that you presented, could you explain further what is intervention design and, in parentheses, shared action?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question in part because it shows our maturity. When we started this work, we said, oh, there's really two pieces to it. There's the collaboration and there's the data sharing, and everything that we care about is in that. And then and in fact, that's partly, that was a blinder that we had because our original funding from Robert Wood Johnson, the original grants that we gave were 2 years, and you can't actually see any changes in health in 2 years. You really can't. And that's when we started to understand that what we could actually measure in that time were changes in community capacity. So as we have followed communities over time, we recognize that once you've got the collaboration in place, and you have to have the collaboration in place, you can't go straight to data systems. But once you have the collaboration in place and you have trusted relationships, then you can have the data systems. But then once you have the data system, data by itself doesn't represent any change. I mean, it really doesn't represent a value in and of itself. Its importance is in how it is used. How it's used to design kind of programs, how it's used to evaluate programs, how it's used as a part of advocacy. So that's really what we talk about, is that once you have the shared data systems in place, then the real power comes from how it gets used.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, if anyone else has follow-up questions to those as well, and those comments, let us know. So let me go through a couple of questions that are things that I think a lot of people are struggling with when they're trying to think through these kinds of complex systems and how to manage and lead them. And the big one that we get asked all the time, and so I'm curious what you have to say about this. How do you know that the network that you're working with is achieving its goals? So, I mean, maybe we can use All-In just to make it real concrete, but how do we know? How do we know it's working and this investment and all the time and money is right?
Yeah, I don't think we know yet. I don't think we do know. And I mean, it is not. I mean, now that we've been doing this for a while, it's the question that we're really starting to answer. And you know, and some things are known. For example, we know if you take talented people that have trusted relationships and they have a good idea of what they want to do. If you give those people money, they will succeed, you know, 3 out of 4 times, or they will experience some level of success, you know, most of the time. So, I mean, there's value in knowing that, because it says that, you know, we are good. We want to be good stewards of the money that we get from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So, I mean, that's an important thing to know. But I think the bigger question that we're trying to understand is, does our vision for building capacity in communities, does that matter? And so it's too trite to say, you know, will people work together in communities if you don't give them money? That's not the only question that we're trying to answer. But there is a part of that, because it goes to, what should our strategies be in the future? Should our strategies just be about funneling money from people who have it, the foundations, and people who don't, community folks? Is it about trying to establish entirely new ways of doing sustainability thinking? I mean, I'm sure that's the case, but it's also about, you know, should we continue to think about this as a network activity? You know, do we believe that you can build strong communities, and then those strong communities build strong networks, and then those strong networks build strong people? I'll just say, you identified Paige on the screen of people on the team, on the Visible Network Labs team. Paige really exposed me to a fascinating idea when I was at the network leadership training about contribution analysis, and about kind of recognizing that when you're trying to make changes in a complex system, you can't draw a straight line like a logic model. You can't draw a straight line between the inputs and the outcomes, because the systems are too complex. There's too many variables that you don't control. And so what you can really try to do is understand, how is what you're doing contributing to this greater social outcome? So I think that's actually the question.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up in 2 ways. One, you know, we talk about at Visible Network Labs that our mission is to build capacity in communities, to know this stuff. I know there's a lot of people trying to build capacity through, you know, like helping others think about a network lens. And so, I mean, you really nailed it. We struggle with that too. Like, what does it actually mean to hand off the knowledge, so that in other ways people can grab it and do what they need to in their community. So, we love contribution analysis over here, and actually Paige taught me about that too. So I'm used to doing social network analysis, and I was always talking about attribution. You know, how do we attribute this intervention to the creation and development of the network? And then she introduced the language of contribution and that method to me. And I had the same experience where I thought, actually, that's what we're talking about in the network. It's hard to, if you start talking about attribution, people will squirm, right? Because that's the whole point, is that we're trying to do it together.
Right.
So what are the, so I'm going to kind of jump to a little bit of questions just about, like, how do you actually run and manage a network like this? So if you, in your work, what are the roles that you have on staff? Who makes decisions? How do you govern this? How have you developed a team around you to make a network work?
Yeah, by the seat of our pants is maybe the truest answer. You know, it's the all-in at allindata.org, by the way. All-in exists as a coalition of the willing. You know, and if you look back on the slide that I put up with our current partners, you know, we have a couple of partners who no longer are a part of All-In. You know, one of them because their funding sunsetted, the other one because they felt, this isn't really working for us, which I totally get. You know, never wanted to try to sell someone on being a part of a network if they didn't see the value for it themselves. So because of that, and because of our kind of real because of our beginnings as kind of a, I don't even know how to describe it. We just sort of said, hey, let's put on a show. That kind of ethos. We've actually done we're trying to catch up now around sort of operations and governance. So we do have a leadership group that's made up of kind of the director level people of all of our partners. And then we have a learning collaboration group that's made up of more of the program staff. And so we have regular meetings there, and Dash used to really drive a lot of this. We're trying to give up so much ownership and control, and that's dependent on other people accepting it, but it's definitely happening. I mean, I see that really strongly as we prepare for the All-In meeting this fall. There's a lot of people now kind of really involved in taking responsibility for different elements of planning that meeting. So, so I would say that we are, as we all are, on a journey of becoming, what we want this to be. And so we are in some cases, doing things, on the fly because stuff needs to get done. And in some cases, we're going back and saying, we need to add some structure. We need to have, documents that guide us. We need to have a way of making decisions. It can't just be sort of whoever, who shows up on the call that month. But the thing that drives all of us is the idea that we can do more together than we can apart. And some of this is just basic, efficiency. We create the All-In newsletter that you talked about, Danielle. So that means that, everybody else, some people create their own newsletter, but some people just use the All-In newsletter. We only have, there's a lot of members of All-In, but not everybody does their own webinars. We try, whenever we do a webinar, we try to make it for everybody in All-In. We use community examples across All-In. The community platform that we use at allin.healthdoers.org, which is free to join, like how I just kind of smoothly put that in there. It's one online platform for 6 different programs. So we really feel like there's some really strong efficiencies and synergies to be gained by trying to do things together, even though honestly, collaboration, you also have to pay the collaboration tax because it's sometimes harder to get people to work together.
That's interesting, to pay the collaboration tax. That means it could cost more to get everyone to work together than going alone. That sounds like
it can certainly take more time. And especially when the decision-making structure isn't super clear. I mean, that was one of the things that became clear to me when we were at the meeting, at your training, is that we've got to be more intentional. Darren Hicks did that amazing conversation about sort of authentic collaboration. And I really heard a challenge in his collaboration about how we have to change our process in order to share power. So I think that's something that's really important. I do want to throw something up on the screen right now. I've been going through the responses to the poll, and do you see the screen about why would you share resources in a collaboration?
Yeah.
Is that So I just want to say I've used this slide at every probably the last 5 webinars I've done. This is the first time that to experience the joy of working together was not the last choice. And I'm really glad to see that, because when I do this for myself now, I put, why would you share resources in a collaboration? I would put to experience the joy of working together as 2nd or 3rd on my list, because I found that when the work is hard and you're facing real difficulties, both personality and the environment and funders and just the way it's hard to do data sharing. If you're in a relationship and doing it with people that you actually enjoy working with, that understand the struggle, that share your values. That's so important to getting through it. So I just want to thank the 9 of you who voted here for recognizing that. I think it's powerful, and I think it's true.
Well, I didn't even realize actually that we had another question after the first one. So if anyone else on the call didn't either, once you submit one, it hops over to a few more questions. So so those are on there too, if anyone wants to put those on. So I know we just have a few more minutes, and I have a whole list of questions, but I want to ask this one because I think it gets back to the thing that we're realizing in our organization is that we kind of, these webinars and conversations get us to know about your work, but they also get us a chance to know the people behind the work. So this is kind of a question about you. Thinking back when you first started, you know, when you explained your journey, I don't really know where to put that in, where it started, but when you started getting kind of into network building work, you know, what would you tell yourself, your newbie self, about what's to come, and what advice would you give to better prepare others for how they might, you know, get ready to do the hard work of building networks and communities?
This is such an important question. I'm embarrassed at the degree to which I claimed and used my privilege for so long. You know, as a tall, middle class, you know, straight white guy, I claimed a room, and I thought that was really important for me to claim the room. It was validating who I was as a person, as a worker, as a man. I mean, I was just so full of crap, you know, and I had to learn that lesson the hard way over a really long time. But I love the conversation that we're all having now around race and class and gender and privilege. I would tell my younger self to take a look at these values that you say you believe in and really talk about what it would mean if you lived them out. Luckily, this conversation about privilege is so now embedded in the conversation of the places where you're at and I'm at, that you don't need to have somebody from outside say it any longer. But I think it's a continual challenge, and we can take it personally, we can take it programmatically, we can take it politically. It's the question of our age. And if we're not using our power to move the needle on equity, I think we got to get out, because that's the challenge for us now.
Yeah, and I am so grateful for you saying that and bringing that up. I think one of the things that we've been experiencing over all of our time in measuring networks and looking at networks is, we use the scale of value, like why people come to the work, and we say, people say, I do this work, this hard work, because there's value in it for me. And then one of the ways that we've had people rate value of partners is on power and influence. And more than ever, we're noticing that those metrics are important in the conversation of how we think about whether we're doing a good job. Where before, even, we started this 10 years ago, and before it was easier to just kind of default and say, of course you want powerful and influential people there, because that's part of building a network of people. And today I think the conversation is so different. It's what is the role of those powerful and influential people in the ways that we're working together, in the ways that this process happens. And so I agree with you that it's come up in all these kinds of different ways. And I think that it's important that we understand that there's value of people in networks who have other things to offer, like their whole heart and soul into the work, even if they have no resources and no power and influence. And we're seeing that networks aren't going to be sustainable unless we really value the kinds of things that people bring to the work, even when the power is not given to them in the process or in the early process. So that's a conversation that could probably be a whole nother webinar, and like you said, the conversation is happening, and so thanks for drawing that in. So we are right at the top of the hour. I see you brought up the what does alignment mean to you, so looks like there's a little bit of agreement here around in sync and agreement. How funny. Maybe we're aligned um, in this group. Who's on the phone on this webinar in what we think about. How does this slide usually turn out for you, Peter, when you ask people this question? What are common things people say?
I'm going to go back and really take a look at it. Usually the words collaboration is featured really strongly, and I don't think that's on here even one time. So agreement agreement and understanding and communication, multiple people talked about, and that's a little bit different. I mean, you can only get so far with the English language, but I like that this it's coalescing around agreement in a way that's different than I usually see it. So I appreciate that it's different. I mean, I was hoping that it would be.
Well, and interestingly, there's a misspelled agreement in there, so it looks like that might have
I saw that. We might try to fix that.
and also same pageness is awesome, and to get on the same page. So there's a little bit about this is hard, but and I love that you drew attention to the fact that the people who come to these webinars. What I do love is that some of them are in transportation and education and public safety and health, and what's amazing to me is that we're all trying to do the same thing, in these different areas. And what we all have in common is this desire and need for us to build skills and figure out from each other how to make it work. So here's how do you relate to health, public health, healthcare as a sector? So I didn't see this question either. So these are kind of dug in there. So nice. Actually, it looks like everyone's got some touch point. Well, the people who answered, some touch point to health. So, well, that's a good sign, isn't it? That almost everything is interconnected these days. So I think this is that network way of working. We've realized that no matter what sector we're in, it's going to have an influence on our outcomes, health and wellness and all kinds of things, economic security and opportunity. So we're in a neat place, I think, in time where it's fun to work this way. So Peter, thank you so much for your time. I always love talking with you and hearing from you, and I'm glad that we got to share that with the group today. And we'll probably be doing some follow-up for the group on the phone. So we're going to go ahead and we send a follow-up email out. We send resources, the video recording. So all the things that you might have questions about, but let us know if you have any others. So with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. Peter, thanks again, and I look forward to the next time we get to connect.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, well, to everyone, have a great rest of your week and a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you on our August webinar.